About a week ago, I went to a meeting of my men's group. We meet once every 2 weeks on Thursday evenings, and most of the men who are in the group are 20 to 30 years younger than I. But at this meeting, we started, and one of the men brought up a subject that was of a lot of interest to everyone else. So a lot of these men are kind of like uh, middle-aged, the midlife crisis, and they're essentially in relationships or have been in relationships, who knows, 20 years or more. They've had kids, and now the kids are about to leave. And there's then a lot of questioning about their relationships, questioning of, feeling limited, that in their role as father, husband, they're always kind of showing up and feel like there's always some expectations. And then, of course, feeling there's a real sense of freedom being suppressed. And this was really lively conversation because other men had ended relationships and then had periods of dating and with agreements of non-monogamy. Some of the men had been in polyamorous relationships. And so, and then there was all this questions of, after, after being, if I were at a college for 20 years, I'd get a sabbatical. Don't I deserve some time off for the relationship to just do what I want, and then maybe I'll come back. So anyway, this conversation was going on, um, and one of the men at some point said, when talking about his need for freedom and how he always, when he was in a relationship or as a father, he always felt this kind of obligation to serve, to please others, to in some way do the work of the relationship, to show up for the relationship and not to put his own needs primary. And so at this point, the man was saying, when he was talking about his need for freedom and how he had always put himself second, he used the phrase, because in this culture you're taught, and then he went on to finish that phrase. But as soon as he said that phrase, I said, in this culture, in my mind, I said, what the hell culture are you talking about? And so I want to speak about that because, and first, before I do it, let me give an example. This post is really about the fact that words can never represent reality. So the example I'll give is years ago when I wrote the book Letters to the River, I talked about spending time by the Gila River. Now, basically at that point, I had led vision quests in the spring and the fall, down near the Gila River. I'd been there. Other times I'd been there hiking. I'd been there doing my own vision quests. So, over the years, I had figured I'd probably spend something like 600 or 700 days in and around the Gila River. And in that book, what I was saying is the words Gila River never change. I was at the Gila River this spring, and at that point, the Gila River was at one of its lowest rates of flow in its history, 25 cubic feet a second. So I used the word Gila River to describe that river. At another time, this was several years ago, at the fall in the flood, the flow rate for the Gila River was 28,000 cubic feet per second. This spring, when I walked across the Gila River, it was only occasionally above my knees. And during that flood years ago, the depth of that river was 15 feet. So, but the words Gila River are always the same. But the fact of the Gila River, the expression of the Gila River can be raging, can be tranquil. In certain parts of it, it's narrow and rushes through these small canyons. In other places, the canyon or the valley opens up wider and is very broad and peaceful and placid. But the words remain the same, but the reality is different. So coming back to my friend in this men's group, I I wanted to say when you I wanted to say, and when he'd finished talking, I did bring this point up, and I said, when you use the word in this culture, what culture are you actually talking about? Because in reality, in the United States in 2025, you have the freedom to be part of almost any culture you want. There are some people who live in religious communities. You have the freedom if you want to be you've heard the expression trad wife or trad husband, or in the United States in 2025, you also have the freedom to be in a polyamorous commune. You have the choice to be a kind of single player. You have the choice to be non-binary or gender fluid. And even, this doesn't appeal to me, but there are women out there who talk about having a AI developed committed relationship. Their sweetheart is actually a digital being and not an actually human one. In this culture, you have the possibility of having having a mostly an online presence where you identify with your avatar and everybody knows you as that. So there's a dozen other options. And what I want to say is probably each of those communities or ways of expressing itself have their benefits and their costs. And so I would be saying to my friends, so what community are you talking about? And I actually questioned him. He said, so each of those communities have their benefits and their costs. But you can't be in them all. You can't be a trad wife and polyamorous at the same time. And so what I really was asking him, are you just complaining, or are we all complaining that we want all of the benefits from all those various communities we could be in without any of the costs that each one requires? So that's what I want to say. Oh, what culture are you talking about? I'll give another example of that the words often don't mean the reality. So we often hear, and we often hear the words, the LGBT community. But calling it a community doesn't make it one. I certainly know, having been around, around, I have lesbian friends. I've been in relationships where women have come out as lesbians. I have, leading men's work, I meet a lot of gay men. I can tell you that generally lesbians and gay men do not like to hang around each other. In general, this is kind of a stereotype, but in general, the gay men's community look at lesbians and see them as basically kind of like boring and sexless, whereas a lot of lesbians look at gay men and consider them adolescent and stuck in forever being just a boy and never growing up. LBGTQ, doesn't make it a community. I mean, I can say, even people talk about being the trans community, and there's a lot of activists in the trans community. But there are also people who are trans who actually support the kind of position taken by, the woman who wrote the Harry Potter novels. God, I'm blanking on her right now, even though I have her picture on the wall. So there are people who are trans who actually support and have voted for Donald Trump, who have voted for freedom of speech, who don't feel that their existence is threatened if someone doesn't use their pronouns. So, and as we all know, the LGBT community, there are many women, lesbians or not, who actually do not want trans women in their spaces. They don't want to have to share bathrooms with people who essentially have the biologies of a man. And I'm not saying this to take any sides or take any position, but what I am saying is calling something a community may make you feel like you have a whole lot more power, like millions of people are on your side. But it's because you call it a community doesn't make it one. Or in the case of my friend, because we talk about this culture, and my friend was saying in this culture, as if he was oppressed by um, parts of this culture. No, he was oppressed by the particular part of the culture in the way he grew up. But this culture has options for him to be in many, many other cultures. So I just want to say that words never constitute reality. And partly that's because reality changes, just like the Gila River changed. I'll give you one more example. A few months ago, I was out west and visiting with a friend, and we got talking about political issues, and that's never a good thing among friends. And she said, "Well, I have a different perspective," and she said, "As a woman who's had to deal with the patriarchy her whole life," and immediately I said, "Whoa." Um, Partly because she said, "As a woman." Well, yes, she is a woman, but actually she was referring to positions on Donald Trump and MAGA and the political left. But the point was she was claiming as a woman, which could mean like 150 million people, but in fact she was part of a very small slice of women, basically, as someone who was she is part of the women who is highly educated, privileged, white, who's actually supported by her husband and doesn't have to work. So that particular slice of women did move left in the last election, but every other demographic of women moved towards Trump to a greater extent um, um, than they had in 2020. So she was claiming this, this community of women. But in fact, the reality was the vast majority of women had moved towards Trump. And she was claiming woman as if she represented 100, represented the 70 million women who moved. 70 million women didn't move away from Trump. The vast majority of those 70 million women moved towards Trump. So anyway, what I just want to say is words and reality are different. And generally, when we tend to use words to like community or culture, we're trying to claim some broad level of support, like we represent there are millions of people behind us, when that's actually often not true. And I think it's really important when we use words like, various cultural identity terms, I'm this, that, or the other thing, or that we actually be really specific about the reality that we are, that we represent, and that we feel positive or inhibited by. Because in general, words and reality, words can never accurately represent reality because words are static, they're defined, they don't change, and reality always does, year by year by year, or like the river always does as it rains, as it flows around the bend, as the channel gets narrow or as the channel gets wide. Reality changes, but words don't. So reality is your actual physical experience of something. But words can really never reach that. Aho.